It's just after 7 in the morning on the 8th of January, and a gamekeeper near Kingassy is walking the edge of a frozen forest road when something moves in the bracken. Not a deer, not a fox. Something low, broad in the chest, with tufted ears and a stub of a tail. It looks at him for maybe 2 seconds, then it's gone. And the gamekeeper just stands there, breath fogging in the cold, because what he's just seen has not lived wild in Scotland for roughly 1,300 years. He calls it in. The police listen carefully. They take it seriously. They don't laugh. Because by the time the sun is fully up over the cairngorms, there is already a second report. Then a third. Somewhere in that vast white wilderness between Newtonmore and Kincraig, in temperatures dropping toward -7, 4 Eurasian lynx have been let loose. Not by accident. Not by some research project gone wrong, deliberately, illegally, by people who told nobody. And in the next 24 hours, what those 4 animals do and what humans do in response becomes one of the strangest, ugliest, most heartbreaking episodes in the entire modern history of British conservation. It ruins careers. It freezes a decade of careful science. It kills at least one of the cats. And it leaves behind a question that nobody in Scotland really wants to answer out loud, which is this. Did somebody just murder the future of British rewilding by trying to save it? Let's go back, properly back. The Eurasian lynx, the species we're talking about, used to be everywhere in these islands. Bones turn up in cave systems from Yorkshire to the Grampians. It hunted roe deer through Caledonian pine forest when there was actually Caledonian pine forest to hunt through, which is to say, before we cut nearly all of it down. The last lynx in Britain probably died sometime around the early medieval period, around the 7th century, killed off by a combination of being hunted for its fur and watching its forest disappear into ship timbers and grazing land for sheep. For 1,300 years, nothing. A predator-shaped hole in the ecosystem. Roe deer numbers in Scotland today are estimated at somewhere around 500,000. There is no natural check on them. They strip new tree growth, they smash the regeneration of native woodland, and the only thing standing between them and total domination of the landscape is a small army of professional stalkers with rifles trying to manage numbers the way an animal would have done for free. So for the last 20 years, a small, persistent, sometimes brilliant, sometimes maddening community of Scottish conservationists has been quietly building a case. Bring the lynx back. Not everywhere, just somewhere. Pick a forest, do the studies, talk to the farmers, talk to the gamekeepers. Talk to the hill folk whose entire livelihood is wrapped up in sheep that wander unfenced across thousands of hectares. Spend the years, build the trust, get the license, do it properly. By the start of 2025, that work was, finally, gaining serious traction. There was a major feasibility study in the works for Kielder Forest down on the border. There was a separate Scottish project called Lynx to Scotland that had spent 4 years, 4 full years, just talking, listening, holding meetings in village halls, drinking tea with sheep farmers who hated the idea and slowly, in some cases, persuading them to at least listen. And then somebody, or some group of somebodies, decided they couldn't wait anymore. Nobody knows exactly when the cats were released. The best guess, based on the condition of the animals when they were found, is somewhere between the late afternoon of the 7th of January and the early hours of the 8th. The drop site appears to have been a forestry track near the Killy-Huntley estate, in that wide, lonely stretch of pine and birch that runs along the River Spey. Whoever did it knew what they were doing in one sense. They picked a place with cover, with prey, with low human density. They picked winter, when the cats would be most likely to lie up and hide. In every other sense, they did not know what they were doing at all. Because here is what they didn't tell the lynx. The temperature that night was going to crash to nearly -8. The cats had almost certainly come from captivity, which means they had no body of experience hunting wild deer in deep snow on a Highland hillside. They had no territory. They had no scent map. They had no built-up reserves of fat from a wild autumn. They had been fed by hand, probably for years, and now they were standing in a black forest in a country where the last of their kind died over 1,000 years ago, and there was nobody coming to put food in a bowl in the morning. By dawn, at least one of them was already in trouble. The first report comes in around 7:30. Glasgow desk officers patch it through to local wildlife crime. By 9 in the morning, the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, which runs the Highland Wildlife Park just a few miles down the road, is on the phone with the authorities. They have lynx enclosures. They have experienced cat handlers. They have tranquilizer equipment. They have, crucially, large transport crates. They drop everything. Helen Sen, who heads up conservation work for the park, will later describe the next 2 days as the most stressful of her professional life. Not because of the cats, because of the situation. Because every single person who has spent the last 10 years carefully, patiently building the political and social case for legal lynx reintroduction in Scotland is now staring at a story that is about to detonate across every newspaper in the country, with the words illegal release and dangerous predator and farmers fear in every headline. The damage to the cause they've been building is happening in real time, hour by hour, while the cats are still loose in the snow. The first cat is caught around midday on the 8th. It's a juvenile. It walks almost casually into a humane trap baited with meat, in full view of a forestry track. It does not behave like a wild animal. It behaves like an animal that expects food to appear from human hands. This tells the handler something terrible. These are not wild-caught lynx from Romania or Norway carefully prepared for release. These are pets, or near pets, taken from somewhere in captivity. They have no fear of people. They have no survival skills worth the name. Releasing them in the Highlands in January is, biologically speaking, a sentence. The second cat is caught later that same day. Same story. Walks into the trap. But it's the third lynx that breaks the story open in the worst possible way. When they find the third one, in a forestry block on the morning of the 9th, it is no longer moving. The cold has killed it, probably overnight. A perfectly healthy young Eurasian lynx, the first of its species to die on Scottish soil in something close to 1,000 years. Dead because somebody who probably believed they were doing the most romantic, most heroic thing they could imagine for Scottish nature, put it on a forest road in midwinter with no food, no shelter, no clue, and walked away. The fourth cat is captured on the afternoon of the 9th, alive, cold, hungry, recoverable. So if you're counting, 24 hours after the first sighting, the score is 2 captured, 1 captured later, 1 dead. 4 animals, taken from somewhere they shouldn't have been, dropped somewhere they couldn't survive, removed by professionals who hadn't slept in 2 days, and now in the back of vans heading for veterinary care. While across the country, the response from the people who actually live in those hills is sliding from confusion into pure, white-hot anger. And this is where the story stops being about cats. This is where it becomes devastating. Because within 48 hours of the release, the National Farmers Union of Scotland is on every broadcast outlet in the country. And they are not measured. They are furious. Sheep farmers, hill farmers, crofters, the entire community that has been cautiously, painfully, slowly inching toward the table on this conversation for years, now feels betrayed, not by the cats, by the people who claim to want to bring them back. Because the message that lands in a farmhouse kitchen in Aberdeenshire is not, "Isn't it amazing? A lynx is in Scotland again." The message is, they don't care what we think, they will do it anyway. They will do it in the dark, and we will be the ones whose lambs pay. Police Scotland opens a formal wildlife crime investigation. The penalty under Section 14 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act for illegal release of a non-native or formerly extinct species can run to a substantial fine and a custodial sentence of up to 12 months. Tips come in, theories spread. Some people whisper about a particular activist. Others suggest a private collector who panicked. Others wonder quietly whether it was even a single actor. To this day, more than a year on, nobody has been publicly charged. And here is the part that almost nobody outside conservation circles understands. The 4 cats are in a way the smallest part of what was lost. What was lost was the conversation. The Lynx to Scotland project, which had been doing the long, slow, unglamorous work of community consultation, sees its funding climate change overnight. Politicians who had been quietly open to the idea become very, very publicly cautious. The Scottish government issues a statement that essentially boils down to, "This has set the case back by years." Sheep farmers who had been 90% against and 10% willing to listen swing back to 100% against. The trust that took a decade to build is gone in a weekend. A British ecologist named David Hetherington, who has spent literally his whole career studying the feasibility of lynx return to the United Kingdom, says publicly that the incident is, and I'm paraphrasing because he says it more politely than I will, an act of breathtaking selfishness. Because the person or people who did this presumably believed they were taking direct action where slow democratic processes were failing. They presumably believed they were ahead of their time. They presumably believed they were heroes. What they actually did was hand every opponent of rewilding in the country the exact piece of ammunition they had been hoping for. A dead lynx in the snow, a frightened farmer on the evening news, a criminal investigation, a confirmed track record of conservation maniacs who can't be trusted to follow the law. You can build a thing for 10 years. Somebody can break it in 10 minutes. Now, here's where the story gets stranger, because you'd think this would be a clean lesson. Don't take wild animals into your own hands. Don't bypass process. Don't release captive cats into Scottish winter. Lesson over. Roll credits. Except it's not that clean. Because if you sit down with the conservationists themselves, the legitimate ones, the ones who absolutely condemn what happened, you find a quieter, more complicated frustration underneath the anger. The frustration is that they understand, even though they hate it, why somebody snapped. Because the official process, the license process, the proper process, has been running for over 20 years. Studies have been done, reports have been written, stakeholders have been consulted, cross-border partnerships have been formed. And in 20 years of patient, expensive, exhausting work, the number of lynx legally reintroduced into the wild in the United Kingdom remains exactly 0. Not 1, 0. Despite Belgium having lynx, despite France having lynx, despite Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Italy, Slovenia, all having functioning reintroduced populations. Despite the ecological case being, scientifically, about as solid as ecological cases get. So when somebody, in the cold dark of an early January night, drives a van up a forestry track outside Kingassy with 4 cats in crates and lets them go, it is impossible to fully separate that act from the slow, grinding, 20-year failure of the official process to do the thing that the official process keeps saying it agrees should happen. It is, in other words, both a crime and a symptom. Now we have to talk about what happened to the surviving cats, because the story doesn't actually end on the 9th of January. The 3 survivors are taken to the Edinburgh Zoo quarantine facility. Vets assess them. They're underweight, they're stressed, but they're alive. Genetic testing is done. The hope, faintly, is that maybe they came from a known captive collection somewhere in the UK, which might give the police a thread to pull. The results, when they come back, are inconclusive in a way that suggests the cats were probably moved through more than one set of hands before they ended up in that forest. And then, on the 11th of January, one of the 3 survivors dies in care, probably from the cumulative stress of capture, transport, and the trauma of those nights in the open. So now the toll is 2 out of 4. Half the cats released in that 24-hour window are dead within 72 hours of being released. And the dream that was supposed to be served by their release, the dream of Lynx walking again in Scottish forests, is further from reality at the end of that week than it has been at any point in the previous decade. The two cats that survive are eventually rehomed in licensed wildlife parks. They will live out their lives in enclosures, watched by school children, eating dead rabbits handed to them on long sticks, never again touching wild ground. Which, given the alternative the previous January, is maybe the kindest ending available to them. I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about your answer before you scroll down to the comments. Because this story is not actually about cats. It's about a question that runs underneath almost every fight happening in conservation right now, and the lynx are just the cleanest, sharpest, saddest example of it. The question is this: when the slow democratic process is failing the planet, when species are vanishing faster than committees can write reports, when every year of delay is another year of forest not regrowing and ecosystems not recovering, what do you do? Do you keep talking? Do you keep being patient? Do you keep going to village halls in the rain and being polite to people whose minds you will probably never change? Do you wait for the license that may never come? Or do you load 4 cats into a van? Because there is a version of this story where if those 4 lynx had survived, if they'd established, if they'd quietly begun to take down some of the roe deer, choking the regeneration of those forests, in 5 years' time, we would be telling a very different story. A story about brave, decisive action. A story about people who got tired of waiting and just did the thing. That story exists in parallel universes very close to this one, but not in ours. In ours, 2 of the cats are dead. The cause is set back by years. The farmers are furious. The police are still looking. And the only honest lesson, I think, is the most uncomfortable one of all, which is that conservation is not just about loving the animals. It is about loving the humans who live next to the animals enough to bring them with you. Otherwise, no matter how right you are scientifically, you will lose. And the animals will lose with you. That's what makes this story so heartbreaking. Not the cold, not the cats. The fact that somebody, somewhere out there, probably still alive, probably still convinced they did the right thing, probably still telling themselves they are the only one with the courage to act, took 4 lives, set back a movement, betrayed a community, and walked away believing they were a hero. I want to know what you think, genuinely. Not a hot take, sit with it. Was this person a criminal, full stop, no asterisks? Or were they a symptom of a process that has been broken for too long? Tell me below. I read the comments, I argue with them, and on this one, especially, I want to hear from people who live near hills like these, and from people who've never set foot in Scotland in their lives. Because both of those perspectives matter. If you want more stories like this, the ones about rewilding, the ones about the strange edges of conservation, the cases nobody tells you about properly, the ones with no clean villains, hit subscribe. There's more coming, there's a lot more coming, because the lynx is just one story. The wolf is another, the beaver is a third, and every single one of them sits on the same fault line between what science says is possible and what people are willing to let happen. A gamekeeper near Kingussy saw something low in the bracken on the 8th of January. Tufted ears, stub of a tail. 2 seconds, then gone. He didn't know it then, but he was looking at one of the 4 cats that was going to break a movement. The lynx looked back at him, briefly, with eyes that had never seen a Scottish winter, and then it walked off into a forest it didn't understand, to live the shortest, coldest, loneliest 24 hours of any reintroduced animal in modern British history. Somewhere out there, the person who put it in that forest is reading the news, watching the coverage, and thinking they did the right thing. That, more than anything else, is what should keep us awake at night.